Hey everyone, in this video we're going to take a look at part 38 of the Hercules story from Ritchie's Fabulae Faciles. Now this chapter is called 12th Labor, Cerberus, the Three-Headed Dog. So we finally moved on in the last video, right, the last chapter from the 11th labor, which was the Garden of the Hesperides, Atlas, the whole thing, and now we're moving on to the 12th and final labor. This is one a lot of people are really familiar with just because of Cerberus, right, the famous dog of the underworld. So it might be something you're familiar with. That being said, I will say that the way Ritchie lays it out, he does tap into some descriptions of this labor that maybe you haven't heard of before. Like you're going to see Cerberus having snakes on his head, for instance. So it's worth looking up. I'd encourage you, if you haven't already, take a look, at this labor. You should with all the labors of Hercules we're talking about, but particularly this labor, take a look at the myth a little bit in advance. That way you understand kind of what's going on here. Okay. So what I've said for all these is the first thing you should do before you dive in is just pre-read the story, come up with a vocab list or find one. There's a bunch out there. Make sure you memorize the words. It's very difficult to actually read this and understand if you don't know what the words mean. So that's always kind of step one. Start there, know the words, and then you can figure out the rest. The other thing I'd encourage you to do is read the story aloud. So if you can find someone in class, maybe a classmate, whatever, read the story to them, practice your speaking, your pronunciation, have them read it back to you, work on your listening. I say that in almost every video I make, but it's really how you unlock Latin as a language and not just something you're doing in your head, right? Reading it or translating your head is not going to get you the same impact as actually speaking it and bringing it to life, particularly listening to someone else reading it to you. The other thing I'd say is use the read and reread method. So if you're still not using it, I recommend you do. It's a great strategy to really unlock the Latin. So you read through it once, you write down any problem areas you have, you go look them up. If it's vocab, it's very easy. Just look up what the words are, right? For grammar, it can be a little tricky, but there's commentaries out there for Ritchie's. You'll probably be able to figure it out or just, like looking through. But try to unlock all that, then go back and read it a second time, okay? And you do the same thing over and over again, 2, 3, 4, as many times as you need. And every time your list of problem areas should be getting smaller until eventually you can read it without writing anything down, right? And you either completely understand the story and know exactly what's going on, or there's only little minor things that you're messing up, but you still get the main idea of the story and most of the material. That's how you know you're on the right track and you're ready to move on, okay? So if you haven't done that yet, pause the video here, go back, do it. The rest of the video is going to be me walking you through the story. So hopefully you've already done it at that point, and you can use what I'm doing as just one last check to make sure that you're on the right track. Okay? So the story starts like this. You have postquam aurea poma ad Euristeum relata sunt, unus modo reliquebatur, e duodecim laboribus quos Pythia Hercule praeceperat. Okay? So you start with postquam, so afterward, right? Meaning after this previous labor, right? So after the aurea poma, the golden apples, relata sunt, they were brought back, right? It's just perfect passive. They were brought back ad Euristeum to Eurystheus, right? He's the king. So after the golden apples were brought back and the 11th labor is done, right? You have unus modo relinquebatur. So one or only one modo, right? Only one was remaining, right? And it's one, a duodecim laboribus, one of the 12 labors, right? Remember, he has 12 labors to do. There's only one left. And there's a relative clause going with it. It's not just the labors, rather, but the labors quos, which, right? It's referring to the labors, which Pythia, right? Remember, the Pythia is sort of the oracle that had told Hercules, you need to go and do these labors, had ordered to Hercules, or had ordered Hercules. It's functioning sort of like a dative direct object almost there, right? The one that she'd ordered him to do is really what it means, okay? So he has one labor left, right? His 12th labor. Then we continue on the next line. You have Eurystheus autem cum Herculem magno per timeret, eum in aliquem locum mitere volebat, unde numquam radire posset. So Eurystheus, moreover, however, right, autem. So Eurystheus, however, so cum here is going to be since, right? So since timeret, he was fearing, right, or he feared magniper, he greatly feared Hercules, right? So remember, he's really afraid of him is kind of the idea. And again, you have that sort of causal use of cum here, right? So since he greatly feared Hercules, Wolebat, he wanted to send Mitere, you just have a complementary infinitive there. He wanted to send him, eum, in aliquem locum, into another place, right? Unde means like from where. It's talking about the locum, the place. So he wanted to send him to another place from where posset, he could, numquam, never, redire, return, right? You might even say like he could never be able to return, something along those lines, okay? So he's never going to come back. So he's trying to think for this 12th labor, where can I send Hercules finally to actually get rid of him, right? Instead of him coming back. And now we have the answer in the next line. You have negotium igitur ei dedet ut canem Cerberum ex orco in lucem traheret. So negotium, or you probably want to start with igitur rather. So therefore, he gave, dated, he gave to him, a, right? You just have the indirect object. He gave to him a negotium, a task, okay? So it's almost like the sense of a labor, right? It's the thing to do for the 12th labor. So he gave to him a task, namely that, right? That, Traheret, he might like drag, right? Ex orco from Orcus. Now, Orcus is sort of an alternative word for, like Hades, right? The Latin version. It's the underworld, is really what it's getting at. That he would drag from the underworld the canem Cerberum, the dog Cerberus, right? And drag him in Lucem into the light, right? So drag him out from the underworld and into the light. So this is the final labor of Hercules, bring him the three-headed dog, the hellhound, right? Cerberus. And then we continue. And you have hoc opus omnium difficilimum erat nemo enim unquam ex orco, rather, redierat. Okay, so this labor, this opus, right, hoc opus, this labor was the most difficult, difficilimum, right, you have the superlative there, the most difficult of all, omnium. So of all the ones that he done, this was the most difficult. And it tells you the reason why, right? For nobody, nemo, nobody ever, had returned, redierat, there you have the pluperfect, had returned from Orcus, from the underworld, which is true, right? Mortals are not allowed to go down and come back. There's all these different myths where people have tried unsuccessfully, but it's very rare. You're not supposed to be able to do this. Okay, so that's why this is the most difficult thing that Hercules does. Then you have praeterea Cerberus iste monstrum erat horribili specie cui tria erant capita serpentibus saevis cincta. Okay, so moreover, right, apart from the fact that mortals don't ever come back, but moreover, that Cerberus, so iste there means that, right? Iste always carries this sort of like a little bit of like contempt, like that one over there, that of yours, I think is usually how you see it described in textbooks, but it's not talking about our dog, right? So you can always translate it as that Cerberus, right? That it's almost like you're saying that you don't like the dog, right? Cerberus, as you say it. So that Cerberus was a monster, right? Monstrum. Okay. Then you have horribili specie, right? Of horrible appearance is how you want to translate that. So what you've got going on here is the ablative of quality, but you want to translate it as of, right? So of a horrible appearance. We've seen that phrase before all throughout Ritchie's. Basically every monster we've run into has been described that way. So if you remember the Perseus story, I think he used the same phrase for Medusa, the sea monster. It's always the same phrase. Okay, so it's this horrible thing. So this is where your understanding of Cerberus might not match what's actually in these myths. A lot of us can think of the three-headed dog. You might not have heard about the serpentibus, right? The serpents, but it's this horrible-looking dog, right? You have cui, so whom or for whom there were tria capita, three heads, right? So off the bat, it has three heads, and it's three heads cincta, surrounded, right? So cincta is just the fourth principal part coming from kingere, which means to like surround something. So all around its head is kind of what it means. Surrounded by serpentibus saevis, these fierce snakes. So the picture I put in this one, I tried to choose a representation of Cerberus that kind of matches that. You can see in this vase painting the snakes hanging off the three-headed dog, right? That's how, actually you can see it on his paws too now that I'm looking at it. But that's how Cerberus is sometimes described, right? The snakes show up. All right. Then it finishes with this. You have antequam tamen de hoc labore narramus non alienum videtur, quoniam de orco mentionem fecimus pauca de ea regione proponere. So antequam just means like before, right? The tamen, however. So however, before narramus, we tell about this labor, de hoc labore, right? So before we go into this labor, the final one, and this is sort of a note from Ritchie talking to you, the reader. So he says, before we go into this labor and talk about it, right? He has a phrase here, non alienum videtur. It literally means something like it does not seem foreign, alienum. But I think it's probably better to translate like out of place, right? Foreign kind of doesn't quite work in English for what he's saying here. So translate alienum as like out of place. So it doesn't seem out of place. Then it says, you have a side thought here. You have quoniam, since fecimus mentionem, since we've made mention of Orcus, okay? Says it wouldn't be so out of place since we're talking about the underworld. What wouldn't be out of place, or wouldn't seem out of place? Proponere ea region, or de regia ea regione, right? So to put forth, proponere, to put forth pauca, a few things about the region, right? De ea regione. So Ritchie is putting a side note at the end to finish this chapter saying, hey, since we're talking and we made mention about Orcus, the underworld, right? Before we go into the labor, it probably wouldn't be out of place to tell you a few things about the underworld, which is what we're going to do in the next chapter, okay? So that's kind of how that non alienum videtur phrase functions at the end. If you get a little tripped up on that, it can seem a little weird. Just remember that videtur is going with proponere there, right? And the quoniam is basically a side thought, and you'll figure it out. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. You didn't have too much trouble translating it. But the next chapter you're going to see is going to be about the underworld. The next few, I think, actually are about the underworld and kind of Hercules getting there, but descriptions of Orcus, right? Which is what Ritchie has laid out here to end this chapter. Okay, so setting up bigger things. But hopefully that wasn't too bad. If you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in the comments below. I'm happy to help. If it was something about my translation, they're never perfect, so always let me know if you're confused, and I'll be happy to explain it more. But otherwise, hopefully it made some sense. You're able to read it. Remember, your goal is to be able to read this without needing a vocab help, or any vocab help rather, or without having to look up sort of the grammar components. If you can do that, you're in the right place, right? You can feel ready to move on. Good luck.